In the heart of the city, Alexander Ward was a name everyone knew, admired by some, feared by most. He was the kind of CEO people whispered about in hushed tones, a man whose brilliance had built an empire, but whose presence felt colder than steel. His office was a fortress of glass and chrome, his eyes sharp and distant, his voice carrying the weight of final decisions. Yet beneath all that power lay a secret that no one outside his closest circle knew: Alexander could not stand the touch of any woman. It wasn't just dislike. It was an unexplainable, almost physical pain, as though every brush of a hand burned into his skin. Handshakes became rituals of avoidance, social gatherings a battlefield of restraint. Women who dared get too close found themselves shut out with icy precision. Over the years, he learned to hide the struggle behind a mask of control, convincing the world that his coldness was arrogance, when in truth it was defense. But behind the walls of his penthouse, in moments when the city lights flickered against his empty reflection, the loneliness crept in. No amount of wealth or success could quiet the ache of a life untouched, unloved, unreachable. He was a man who commanded the world but could not allow another soul near him. And though he never admitted it aloud, there were nights he wondered whether he was cursed to live forever in this solitude, a king trapped in a golden cage, untouchable. The night rain fell hard against the windshield, blurring the city lights behind him as Alexander's car sputtered to a stop on a lonely rural road. The engine gave out with a final shudder, leaving him stranded in the middle of nowhere. For a man who had built his life on control, the sudden helplessness felt unbearable. He stepped out, rain soaking through his expensive suit, the silence of the countryside pressing in. Just as frustration boiled over, a warm glow appeared in the distance. A small farmhouse with smoke curling from the chimney. He made his way toward it, each step heavier than the last. The door opened before he could knock. A young woman stood there, her hair damp from the mist, her hands roughened by work, her eyes filled with quiet strength. "You look like you need help," she said simply, ushering him inside without hesitation. She introduced herself as Clara, offering him a towel, a seat by the fire, and a bowl of hot soup. Alexander, unaccustomed to such uncalculated kindness, felt disarmed. When he rose to thank her, his knee buckled slightly, and Clara reached out instinctively to steady him. For a heartbeat, he froze, expecting the familiar sting that always followed a woman's touch. But nothing came. Instead, he felt only warmth, gentle, grounding, utterly human. It was so ordinary, yet to him, it was extraordinary. For the first time in years, Alexander realized he wasn't recoiling, wasn't breaking apart. Her touch didn't hurt. It healed. Days turned into weeks, and what began as a chance encounter grew into something Alexander never expected. Though his car was quickly repaired, he kept finding reasons to return to the quiet village. Sometimes he claimed it was for business calls and peace, other times to check on the roads. But deep down, he knew it was Clara who drew him back. She lived with a simplicity he had never known, waking early to tend the garden, sharing bread with neighbors, laughing with children who came running to her doorstep. She worked hard, yet her spirit was never hardened. Alexander, who spent years hidden behind boardroom tables and skyscraper walls, found himself drawn into her world. He watched her kneel in the soil, dirt smudging her hands as she explained how each seed held a promise for tomorrow. He walked with her through fields at dusk, where the air smelled of earth and freedom instead of steel and ambition. She never once asked who he was or what he owned. To her, he was simply a man, not a title, not a fortune. And slowly, something began to change. The tension in his chest loosened, the coldness in his voice softened. For the first time, he laughed without calculating how it would be perceived. In Clara's presence, Alexander rediscovered pieces of himself he thought were long buried. She didn't just touch him without pain, she touched the humanity he thought he had lost. And in that quiet village, the untouchable man began to feel alive again. It happened on an ordinary evening, the kind that slipped by unnoticed in the village, until the accident. A neighbor's cart overturned on the road, leaving an elderly man injured. Without hesitation, Clara rushed to his side, her hand steady as she wrapped cloth around his wound, her voice calm as she comforted him. Alexander stood nearby, stunned by the confidence in her every move. She wasn't just kind, she was trained. Later that night, as the villagers gathered to thank her, someone whispered her full name, words that made Alexander's heart jolt. Clara Hartwell. The name rang with familiarity. He had heard it before, in boardrooms, in charity reports, in conversations among the wealthy elite. She was the estranged daughter of Margaret Hartwell, a legendary philanthropist whose family name carried as much weight as his own. Clara had walked away from that world years ago, leaving wealth and privilege behind to live a life of service. The truth hit Alexander like a storm. The woman who had treated him with nothing but humility and kindness was not just a rural girl but someone who had deliberately chosen a path of compassion over power. She could have stood beside the wealthy and influential, yet she had chosen the forgotten and unseen. As he watched her smile gently at the old man, Alexander felt his chest tighten with something deeper than admiration. For the first time, he realized that Clara's greatest inheritance wasn't her family's name, it was her heart. And it was this truth that shook him more than anything he had ever faced in the corporate world. The revelation stayed with Alexander, echoing louder than the sound of city traffic or the clinking of crystal glasses in boardroom celebrations. He couldn't shake the image of Clara kneeling on that dirt road, giving herself so completely to others without hesitation or pride. For years, he had believed power was measured in influence and wealth, yet standing beside her, he saw a different kind of strength, one rooted in compassion. A week later, he returned to the village not as a CEO in an immaculate suit, but as a man carrying something far heavier than contracts or ledgers, humility. The villagers gathered, curious, as Alexander announced his intention to rebuild their crumbling school and restore the worn-out clinic. "This isn't charity," he said softly, his voice stripped of its usual authority. "It's gratitude. For teaching me what it means to live." When the applause faded, Alexander turned to Clara. She met his gaze, and for once, he didn't hide behind walls of pride or fear. Slowly, almost cautiously, he reached for her hand. This time, there was no flinch, no dread of pain, only warmth that spread through him like sunlight after a long winter. His eyes softened, and hers glistened with unspoken understanding. In that simple touch, Alexander's world transformed. He was no longer the untouchable man locked in solitude. He was human, whole, and finally free. Sometimes, the greatest fortune isn't found in boardrooms or banks, but in the gentle hands of those who remind us we are never meant to walk alone.